Hallo allerseits an den anderen Bildschirmen. Ich bin Manu und das ist Peppe. Ich würde einen kurzen Einführungspart auf Deutsch machen und dann auf Englisch wechseln. Der Vortrag wird auf Englisch stattfinden. Wir sind Grenzkritik. Das ist eine Gruppe von Menschen aus verschiedenen Initiativen in Münster, die schon seit einigen Semestern jedes Semester Vorträge organisieren. Und wir starten dieses Semester mit dem Vortrag von Peppe über Ausbeutung von Geflüchteten, vor allem in der saisonalen Arbeit, hauptsächlich in Sizilien. Eine kurze Ankündigung würde ich vorher noch machen, und zwar steht auch der zweite Vortrag schon fest in der Grenzkritik-Reihe. Und der wird am 6. Dezember stattfinden, auch wieder um 20 Uhr, auch wieder über YouTube Digital Radikal. Den Link werdet ihr vorher über bekannte Kanäle wie Münster Alternativ wieder bekommen. Und zwar wird Norma zu neuen Munizipalismen in Südosteuropa mit in oder gegen den Staat referieren. Sie hat im Rahmen ihrer Promotion viel in Serbien, Bosnien-Herzegowina geforscht und schaut sich dort eben munizipalistische Stadtbewegungen an. Genau. I would switch to English now. Hey Peppe, welcome. I'm so glad to see you again. I'm really lucky to have you here. We met already last year in Sicily. I was there with university, and we had the chance to got to show the refugee support, refugee solidarity movement in Catania in the south of Sicily by Peppe, and we had a really good day, and we're really glad that this connection kept in contact and that we now have you here on our screens. And Peppe was studying at the University of Nijmegen in the Netherlands, a human geographic master's, which is called Europe Borders, Identity and Governance. And he now just started his PhD at the University of Firenze. And maybe I'd leave it like that, and I would hand the word over to Peppe. Thank you.
So, hello everybody. Thanks for inviting me. Thanks, Manu, for inviting me. It was very nice. Also, our conversations in Catania are memorable somehow. So it was very nice, and it's very nice to be here. So, okay, of course, I also, as Manu said, starting a PhD and all this kind of academic stuff. But today I don't want to really give a lecture. I have nothing to teach. I have just, maybe a couple of opinions that I have that I want to share with you about how the asylum system has worked in these years and how it's continuing working. And this is, of course, is also given by some academic background and research, but it's also like really rooted in the kind of work that I do in Sicily. So I work for this NGO called Borderline Sicilia, and we monitor migration in the south of Italy, especially, of course, in Sicily, as you can understand, from the disembarkation of individuals in hotspots or reports to the reception, quality of life, quality of reception, and also trying to be careful about illegal work, illegal intermediation, which often leads to migrant exploitation in terrible, inhuman conditions. So that's what we do at Borderline. In the last 2 years, I've been an operator of this organization. So what I would like to talk about right now, or in this talk, is I would like to start from the core that I think, at least what I believe, it's the core of the European asylum law, or European asylum rights in European Union, in the EU. And well, I will try to share my PowerPoint, which is just to give you an idea. You're not going to see me, but I think it's fine. Okay, allow. Perfect. So So what I would like to talk about is the core, as I said, what's really defining now the EU asylum system as it is. And in order to do this, rather than showing you the laws, which I think are pretty evident, I wanna start with a legal case that was really landmark, that really changed the way we were looking, or we are looking at the asylum system in Europe. And okay, if you read, actually, you spoil the end, so I'm gonna go back later on. So this is the case of X and X contre l'État belge against the Belgian state. So X and X, normal family, a Syrian family. I think this was in 2015, so at the beginning, at the offspring of the Syrian civil war. And so Manu, if you have trouble with the connection, or if I'm not clear, just like let me know or write me in the chat. Okay, I take it is that okay.
Everything working fine.
Okay, perfect. Just let me know, because I don't see anything. I just see my presentation at the moment. So okay. So X and X is a Syrian family that in 2015, one of the parents, let's say, of this family was kidnapped, tortured, and then released only after a ransom was paid. So as you can understand, this really shows how there were all the conditions, or preconditions actually, to obtain, to be granted a international protection, a refugee status once arrived in Europe. But this once arrived in Europe is actually the entire problem, because so far so good. I mean, this is a clear example of torture, clear example of impossibility of staying in a country, right? The problem is that they didn't, as many people I would assume want, right? They didn't want to just take a boat and go to Greece, for example, as many will be forced to do then later in the years, but also before. They were a middle class family. They just wanted, with children, with minors, they wanted just to take a flight. So what they did was to go to Lebanon and go to the Belgian embassy to ask for a humanitarian visa in order to take a flight, take a plane, and go to Belgium to ask asylum, to lodge an asylum request. Pretty self-evident, I would say. The problem is that the embassy is not allowed to give humanitarian visa, but it is a prerogative of the state. And the national state, the Belgian state, in this case, said, of course, no. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here, probably. And, of course, the family appealed to the human rights courts of the European Union, which basically said that it is impossible for them, according to the legislation that we have now at the moment, to grant any kind of humanitarian visa, and this is only a prerogative of the state. But the Belgian state had already refused. So in the end, the dismissal done by the European Court of Human Rights meant that they were not able to ask asylum in Belgium. And the advocate, General Mengozzi, we're reading here, it was the lawyer that was kind of monitoring the proceedings. And this is the comment that he wrote. So, I mean, of course, it's much longer than this. I just took like a couple of sentences I'm going to read. So, frankly, what alternatives did the applicants in the main proceedings have? Stay in Syria? Out of question. Put themselves at the mercy of unscrupulous smugglers, risking their lives in doing so, only in order to attempt to reach Italy or Greece? Intolerable. Resign themselves to becoming illegal refugees in Lebanon when no prospect of international protection, even running the risk of being returned to Syria? Unacceptable. So as you can see, when the European court decided about this case, I guess that to a certain extent they had also to think about the alternatives that they were giving to this family, to the applicants, right? I don't know if they did. It's clear the conclusion of the advocate, right? That the European Union in this way, or at least the European Court of Human Rights, has not given any possibility to this family to remove themselves, to kind of avoid the risk of staying there. Because, of course, they were in Lebanon, so they will not be able to stay in Lebanon for long, or at least they will be undocumented. They can return to Syria, but there is the civil war, right? The only option really left is to smuggle, is to take a boat, to pay someone, trying to reach possibly Turkey first, and then Greece, and then maybe a northern country. So what are the main 2 points that I want to highlight that as far as I see it, at least are really like, are showing from this interpretation, or at least this ruling of the European Court. Sorry, I lost it. Yes, okay. So the first is, I had a slide, but it's somewhere elsewhere. So the first point is that there is impossibility of becoming an asylum seeker without entering illegally in the country. So while this is obvious to a certain extent, in the sense that the EU asylum law literally claims that you need to enter in the country to lodge an asylum request. It never says that you have to enter illegally, But once you don't have any legal conditions, and you are, for example, in this case, someone who is escaping the war, so what's your only alternative? It's only entering legally. So basically, to a certain extent, since we don't have so many legal channels, and legal channels are really for very, very, very small percentage of people, and most of them it's like very bureaucratic. The only way left to thousands of people, if not millions, because 5 million escaped from the war in Syria, is to enter illegally in Europe in order to receive to lodge an asylum request and be interviewed to get international protection. The other point that I would like to highlight is that if this family had the opportunity instead to lodge an asylum request in the embassy, getting the international protection while being protected by the embassy of Belgium in Lebanon, and then take the flight, this would have not happened. So to a certain extent, they would have never gone to a smuggler to ask for going to Greece, for example, because they would have another option. So the problem is that smuggling, to a certain extent, is also a byproduct, is also something that is being created and concocted by the EU asylum system. I'm not saying that it's done on purpose, okay, because that would be maybe, too much, also because you need to find then who is responsible somehow. But the way the asylum system has been created or designed really creates smuggling as a phenomenon. Because for most of the problem from the Arab Spring was that they had no other ways to enter into Europe, and of course then smugglers will just be happy about the opportunity to get more money. And while this is the entire discourse of this entire discourse is kind of not written, not really understandable, what is instead really clear is the way the European Union is framing the problem. So most of the time is a problem of securitization. So actually, most of the time that the European Union has introduced border policies like Frontex or the removal of military save and rescue ships was because they thought it was for example, a triggering factor for migrants, as saving people is a triggering factor, I don't know, whatever. And at the same time, they also thought that in this way, by reducing the help in the Mediterranean, they would have avoided the people dying, because if no one was saving them, they would have not just have left, right? So this entire securitization issue, or this entire securitization policy that is shaping, actually, I would say, the policies of the EU, they stem from a problem which is within the European Union asylum system. Because we wouldn't have had not all these problems if, for example, embassies could, just get asylum procedures. And here I'm just talking about formal requirements, because of course, then for people who are not refugees, who are just looking for a better life, it's even worse. So but just this was to show how the asylum system works with the categories it has created, refugees and so on. And what I want to show is that, for example, now you see two maps. So one is the Frontex clear, no? And the other one, someone could guess, but it is the Second World War, right? It's the German Nazi actual invasion of the Netherlands, and then how they entered in Belgium. So as you can see, they show the same kind of iconology. Both, they are represented with arrows, which really clearly shows an invasion. And while securitization and border practices could be considered the methodology that European Union is now adopting or using, these frame, so the invasion kind of frame, is more the ontology, or at least the way the European Union is really conceiving migration. So let's look better at this Frontex map. From this Frontex map, I get two things. The first is that going from, for example, Eritrea, I don't know if you see my mouse, Eritrea to, for example, Europe, it's quite easy. It's fast, it is a huge line, getting all together then in the end, and then we just move all together to the central Mediterranean, right? So what I would get from this map is that, I mean, people are just maybe taking a bus or a train or whatever, you know, because it seems super fast, right? And also, like, it seems that all of them are coming together, really invading us, while of course fluxes are much more distributed. It will be not like this, the reality. The reality would say that from Nigeria to arrive, for example, just to arrive in the coast of North Africa, it takes years. You would see, for example, the desert, which here is a continuous line, while it takes months, and many people have been kidnapped, and all these kind of things, you know. So that's also weird, because sometimes we think the migrants that are coming to Europe are like, you know, these pure victims. They are either criminals or victims, but actually they are like really crossing half a continent, and they have seen so many things that our fat bottom, let's say, in our sofas, you know, looking at television, we have no idea about how to solve half of the problem they did. So what you can see is that this map really gives you a representation of migration. And unfortunately, this is not a alternative right party who is, you know, doing this representation, but it is Frontex, which is the Coast Guard of the European Union entirely, right? So it really represents all the countries to a certain extent. And I mean, it's clearly done in bad faith, and it really shows how the frame for migration has always been the war, exactly as the other map is showing us, you know, because the war as a frame is helpful to then adopt, for example, harsh policies. And we have seen this, for example, with the COVID, right? Because we needed to, for example, do the lockdown and all these kind of things, and it needed to be framed as a war. So we have seen the essential workers, which are dying, the medics are dying, and this is done for the motherland, to save the motherland from the epidemics, from this war, this invisible war. They are the anonymous soldier that is like, you know, dotting our squares with statues. In 20 years, maybe that's them. And I wanted to show you that if you take another map of COVID, you will see more or less the same thing. So, so you see how, for example, the problem in this case is clearly identified with China. It has a lot of lines, and it's clearly that it says what you should do. This is also the point of the Frontex map. It just doesn't give you an interpretation of the data, but it also gives you solution. So what's the solution in this case? You know, you see where the lines are, you see where you need to stop the borders, where you need to put a sort of wall, metaphorical, whatever you want, but it's okay, every map has a policy implication, which is really clear and self-evident in most cases. So this example of Frontex, Trump and Frontex for me kind of overlap, and the Netherlands with the German invasion is from a Rodrigo Benolesi, actually it's written with Henk van Autum, but this is taken from his PhD dissertation on the cartographic identity of Europe, you know, so how Europe has given its identity through also cartography and maps. Very interesting if you want to read it. This is just an article. And so, because many would say, then how would you, you know, make a map, right? So this is Filip Rekashevich, which is a cartographer for Le Monde Diplomatique. So I'm not talking about the most leftist newspaper, or even I'm talking about a small newspaper. But Le Monde Diplomatique, as you know, it's one of the most important French and international magazines. And you see how the map that being published in this newspaper, in this journal, they are drawn by hands. And in spite of the fact that they are drawn by hands, so they have a level of cartography which would say that is not as much as Frontex, it is much more accurate. It really shows how and what's happening in the Schengen space. So you see the limit, which is this red dot. Then you see the four frontier, the four border, which is, for example, in Africa, in Turkey, with the EU Turkey agreements, with Libya, but also with the fact that, for example, the French government military is in Mali, for example. Then you see the depth in the sea. You see you understand the geopolitics of Europe and how this is done by looking at the map in a much more accurate way than just put some fluxes in a very nostalgic way. Sorry. So this was just to show you, that we can use maps in a way that really shows the way, for example, geopolitics works in this case. But most of the times, you will see maps that have policy implications and that are done in order to give an interpretation of data. So this is the COVID. Okay, so the so while this we could say that on the one hand is the European Union somehow interpretation or frame given to migration, and on the other hand we could say that this is also rooted in the laws that they have designed. So as we showed at the beginning, this has a real local effect on the local effect, and on the national level. So what I would like to show you is how irregularity, namely the fact that people becomes undocumented and so they don't have right in the state where they are, how irregularity is concocted. So we have seen the first step to a certain extent. The first step is that you need to enter illegally to become an asylum seeker. Because if people could arrive possibly with a flight, and maybe take their own hotel or whatever, it would be a bit different, right? But they can't. So they can only come in illegal ways, and they can lodge an asylum request, which is the only way they have to stay in the territory without receiving immediately an expulsion decree, which is, of course, which means that they are ready to be deported. And so most of them, they will lodge so this is taken from in Italian, as you can see, and this is the way it works in Italy, and now irregularity is concocted in Italy, and it's taken from a Buon Diritto, which is a good NGO in Rome doing a lot of legal support to refugee and asylum seekers. So everything starts, if you see in the what's these. Domanda di protezione is in the left, I think, yes. You will see that, yes, so okay, they will start with a request, with an asylum request, right? So what happens is that if we check the data, especially the last 3 years, when in all Europe we had somehow also the rise of alternative right parties, and alternative right parties, you can see how, for example, the rate of asylum seekers applications that have been accepted, that have become, for example, an international protection, is around 7% of all people that are coming every year. And 7% it's both international protection, the subsidiary one, and the refugee. Sometimes it has arrived to the 10% of people is the maximum. The 90% of people can get different kind of protection, but at the European level, there are none. So everything is left to the good faith of the state. In Italy, we had a humanitarian permit, which was a protection on humanitarian basis grounds, that was abrogated, that was eliminated by Salvini, you know, this alternative right, former Minister of Interne in Italy. And in this case, you can see after the beginning, after the humanitarian protection was abrogated, you know, this 80% was basically getting rejected in first instance, because the humanitarian protection was accounting for 30% of people, no more. So it was already like 60% who was receiving like a first instance denial, a first instance rejection, but now we have reached 85% sometimes. So we are really in a place where most of the people are not receiving any protection. So what this implies is that you can appeal, of course, to the first rejection, and in this sense, you are allowed to stay in the territory legally as long as your entire asylum procedure is over, and it can take also years. And we're gonna see how these years are spent, you know, in a second. But first, I would like to tell you that, you know, not so many. Besides, the first thing that I would like to highlight is that the appeal can last years, can last up to 4 years, especially now with the COVID. There are so many applications and so few personnel in Italian courts that it can take up to 3 years or even 4 to just receive the final no. And even in this case, most of the time, like more than 65% of the times, people will get a second definitive rejection, which implies that they are irregulars. Okay, they are now, from now on, they have no legal right to stay in Italy and in other European countries because their appeal was rejected. So they should go away. They should go back to their country, or they will be deported. But deportation is a big question, because how do you deport people? You know, sometimes I think that in propaganda, or at least in televisions, what you see is like, we should increase deportation rates, or we should all these kind of things. But deportation, it's very difficult topic. It's very difficult because you need an agreement with the state that you wanna repatriate people to. Repatriating people so means that another country needs to identify the person as a national and then accept their return. But most countries are also, like, you know, receiving a lot of money from remittance, I think it's called, you know, like people abroad bringing back money. I think that for some African countries, it is at least like a couple of points of GDP. So they are not so happy about these repatriation agreements most of the times. And most of the times they are done through a sort of threat, or at least with a lot of economic support or police support, this kind of things. So not all the countries are very happy. So the countries that, as you can see, are on the right column: Albania, Algeria, Morocco. Okay, these are the Italian translation. These are the 13 countries which are considered to be safe by Italy. If a country is considered to be safe, this means that you can be immediately deported, and you are not gonna receive any international protection because your asylum pledge is completely false. Because we know, the state knows that those countries are safe. So why are you asking asylum in the first place? And this is also part of the European Union law. This is called manifestly unfounded claims, and it is for all those people that are coming from countries which the EU has recognized as safe. So for Italy, this is the list. But as you can see, although all these people coming from these countries will immediately become irregulars, we have an agreement of repatriation with few of them. And also many of these agreements are not about repatriation, like the one with Ghana and Senegal. The Italian government is not really deporting so many people to Ghana and Senegal. But for example, to Tunisia and Morocco, yes, a lot. So you can see that if you remove like a couple of 3-4 countries which the agreements are still in place, most of the people will stay regular in the territory, and no one will take them and bring them back. I think for Germany this is a bit different, in the sense that Germany is a stronger geopolitical state, so it has more agreements. with countries like I think that Ghana and Cameroon also, but it is mostly the same also if you put Dublin, which maybe we can discuss in the Q&A if you have questions about Dublin. So, and even if you take Tunisia, which is one of the best agreements, best of course, you know, just to say from the state point of view, you will see that okay, no, sorry. I was receiving a message by Manu, but it was just about my mouse. Very happy about this. So the Tunisia agreement, it's especially like before COVID, it was not so much. It was like 80 people per week, something like this. So 250, 300 maximum per month. While fluxes of Tunisians are usually higher, and also we have so many irregular Tunisians already in the territory of Italy. That to like deport them, all of them, it would take years. Like I think that there was a satirical journal who did the calculation. It would have taken, according to Salvini's, you know, fluxes and numbers, 230 years. So they will all be dead by then. So as you can see, the problem, it's also this one. You know, it's a very simplified issue, but it is not, because you cannot just deport people. They will stay regular in the territory. So why don't you just give them some sort of documents so that they can, for example, go to the hospital? But whatever. So while this is the national level, so you see how I'm trying to going always in a smaller scale from macro to micro. We started with the EU asylum system, the laws of the asylum system, and the frame that is adopting the way the national level is receiving the laws that are, you know, described by the European Union asylum system, and now they are trying to implement them in a very bad way. And now we arrive to the local level, and so we arrive to our work in Sicily, my work in Sicily. So this is a map I drew. It's similar to Frontex map to a certain extent, but with the opposite intent in this case. So please, I apologize. So these are the CAS. CAS is a very interesting concept because literally it means extraordinary reception center. And although they are extraordinary, they are actually the ordinary way standard reception centers. So always this emergency kind of frame that we need to give to the things. We cannot just, you know, think of a asylum integration system which would work out of emergency. Emergency is the only word that, you know, with the financial crisis, we had the financial crisis, then we had the Arab crisis, spring with the refugee crisis, now we have the COVID crisis. It's always going emergency to emergency without really tackling any issues. So these are the all the reception centers present in Italy, in Sicily, as of 19th of October. Several are closed, so, and several have become Corona center for quarantine. And at this point, I'm showing also a situation where there were not so many reception centers because of the Libyan agreements, which meant that most of the people started being rescued. I'm sorry, you cannot see my face when I say rescued, but they were taken in the sea and brought back to Libya in detention center. So the Coast Guard, the Libyan Coast Guard, the creation of the Libyan Coast Guard and the Save and Rescue Zone given to the Libyan Coast Guard, which is probably one of the most atrocious human crime committed by the European Union and by Italy. But since 75% of people now are getting refoulés or pushed back by the Libyan authorities, there was not so much need of huge reception centers. So this is the situation in November 2019, before the COVID started, and I divided them by central, peripheric, and isolated. So you might think, yeah, well, at least there are some central, but besides Palermo, which is here, the capital, which is very big, so it was also very difficult for me to understand what was central or not. And besides a couple of, you know, like all these central reception centers that you're seeing are in small cities, which an average of population that is less than 10,000 people, besides Palermo, as I said, which is here. If you see instead the other big cities, for example, Messina here, all of them are peripheric. If you see, for example, Ragusa, which of course with the hotspot of Pozzallo, all of them almost are isolated even. We don't have reception center here, which is Catania, because the biggest one, which I'm gonna talk about if I have time in 10 minutes, was closed at the time when I did the map. But it was huge, and it was 45 kilometers from the city. So, I mean, most of them are isolated and peripheric, with few exceptional central, which are mostly in small villages. For example, I've been here, and it took 2 hours of without path, without trail, road to arrive. And I found a situation which was really inhuman to a certain extent, because it's easy to hide in small centers, and you will still be paid by the state, you know, almost 25 euros per day per migrants that you have, and then maybe you offer 5 euros, you know, service per day. So, okay, what I would like to say about this map is that why, you know, when these are all run not by the municipalities, all of these are run by the Minister of Internal Affairs, and of course the bureaucratic center, which is in the province. So when you are actually opening a reception centers and you receive various offer, because it's an application, and most of them are isolated or peripheric, why you choose it, okay? So I guess that the reason is we need to go back to the Frontex map, right? It's the securitization, the fact that we have this representation of the migrant as a, you know, someone who is invading us, who is a criminal, escaping the border control, arriving in our territory, and then claiming asylum, even though they are coming from a very safe country. You know, this is the main interpretation. So for this reason, we need to introduce border practices. And for this reason, municipalities and the governments at the local level are rejecting to create and open projects in the city center, for example, where, I mean, I don't think I have to discuss this. I guess inclusion and in, you know, multi-ethnicity, or the possibility of, you know, integrating, if you want to use this word, is much easier in a city center, or in the city at least, than instead being 15 kilometers, for example, from the main center. So there is, of course, you know, I guess that, I mean, as I've seen in my experience, many camps are run by criminal organizations that are only exploiting the fact that they can get a lot of money. In 2016, we had this huge inquiry done by the anti-mafia pool called, I don't remember now, but it was huge. It was in Rome, and it took a lot of huge like names also. And there was also some reception centers in Italy, and there is this wiretap, I could have included actually, which literally says migrants are the new cocaine. Okay, so the money that the mafia was making with cocaine, with drugs, has been doubled, let's say, but at least, you know, they felt that it's the same kind of money you make, and it's everything legal. So, of course, there's a huge problem in this. So I want to show you, this is the CARA Mineo. So it is here. If you can see my mouse, I will show you. So maybe there's some latency. So more or less here, and the closest city was 35 kilometers. Actually not, this is the biggest city. So the closest city is the one you can see in the map, on top of the hill. It was 8 kilometers of hill, and there was no means of transportation to go. So even if you had just, I don't know, to buy something, or I don't know, just to have a stroll in the center, you could not go, because it was super far. Even with the bikes, most of them had bikes, it was super steep, so not super easy. So they basically never came to Mineo, which is the city on top of the hill. And this is also the point. They wanted it there because it was far from Mineo. It would have been easier. But at the same time, this center was in the middle of anything, and it's literally somehow surrounded by orange trees and orange plantation, so that a lot of people in the end went working in the countryside, do agricultural works, and most of them have been exploited also, although I would like to return to the exploitation in a second. So as you see, I mean, it really seems that it's all done in purpose. So they arrive illegally because that's the only way they can enter. They will be rejected 2 times. First from the Commission granting international protection, and then in the court as an appeal. During these 4 years, they can live in this center, for example, which is located in the middle of nothing, in the middle of a reception, in the middle of agricultural fields, and with especially this place, which also has like a very depressed economy. So it was also thought that this could like boost economy, you know, this was the discourse at the time. This is part of my master thesis. So I've collected a lot of historical data, also when I was not here in Sicily, about this place. So basically they are forced to work in the countryside because they don't get any money. They should get 75 euros per month, but in the CARA Mineo, this was given through cigarettes. And I have recorded several times this discussion with people telling me even minors are getting cigarettes, you know. And the reason for this is that the European Union laws doesn't really say anything about how you should give the money to migrants. It just say that it should be €2.50 per day, and you can also give it in goods or voucher. And I guess cigarettes were a voucher. I'm not so sure. This is very interesting also because what I'm going to talk now is about the other side, right? So while everything seems to be completely done in order to exploit migrants, they are really able to avoid exploitation. So, for example, we were talking about the cigarettes. This I need to zoom it out if you're not seeing. So with cigarettes, most of them were going to markets in Catania, so 45 kilometers from there, selling illegally the cigarettes, taking the money, buying other stuff, and then setting up shops. This is the inside of the reception center. It's also very interesting because the reception center was the second biggest in Europe after the one in Lesvos, and was a former USA military civil base. With military civil, I mean that it was for military family. So there was no any, you know, real facilities or military facility, but it was just for the families of the soldiers. And it was abandoned because they wanted to build a new one, and you know, the owner of the place decided to rent it to the Italian government to do this reception center. So it is very nice, actually. You know, you see, it's beautiful houses, row houses with gardens and all these kind of things. And so sometimes it was defined as a paradise or as a 5-star hotel, while actually it was not. So this was one of the market. It was part of the market that they have set it up. So what I realized after a year spent visiting and monitoring the CARA Mineo is that it was a society. It was indeed a society. The entire effort of securitization had gone wrong, overly, because people were able to move. So most of them, especially those who were former asylum seekers and had somehow a way to get some money, had bought some cars, they were going forth and back and forth from Catania to the city, to this reception center, paying, you know, 5-6 euros, something like this. And this was the way they created the means of transportation. So while this place was in the middle of anything, with nothing around besides illegal work, they were still able to set up market, to have means of transportation, real means of transportation, to go like far away. They were also able, for example, to set up satellites for televisions. They were buying satellites and bringing them back and then fixing them with a GNOME in order to, you know, find the frequency, only in order to watch African televisions, and all in order to, somehow bring back their culture into the camp. There were also several riots in this center. You can imagine 1,200 people in the same place with nothing, especially at the beginning when they had literally no service. Most of the service they ended up having were self-given, or they were the result of struggles, I would say political struggle. There was when it opened, I talked to one of the person that was there, who was now a former refugee has also written a couple of amazing books, Abdel Fattah. And he told me that when they went writing the first time, they did it because they made a calculation that in order to be interviewed, because they were waiting for the interview for the asylum application, they made their calculation, and since they were doing like 3 people per day, it would have taken something like more than 200 years. So they went out rioting, and then they decided to create a new interview center within the reception center. So so everything that somehow they ended up having was self-given or self, had somehow to a certain extent. So this is the camp. Okay. On the other hand, I mean, also, for example, talking about the problem of the agricultural. So while on the one end, for many people, and there are many books written on this, it is clearly a problem of exploitation. There is an inhuman treatment going on. People have died. We now have a couple of laws in Italy about working illegally working illegally through intermediation. Since an Italian woman died in 2015, of course, we waited for the white one to die because the black ones were not enough. And still, in spite of this, it is a constant problem because these are places which have no money at all. There is very depressed economy. They need cheap labor force, and asylum seekers are perfect because they will accept anything since they actually need the money. But this is not always the problem. So what I witnessed in my experience, and this is also open to discussion, as I said, I'm not giving answers or I'm not telling the truth, I'm just giving my opinion on what I saw. For example, people who were moved into a better camp, much better camp, and I also told them, folks, finally, you're getting a nice place in the city center with nice bedrooms, nice open air rooms to stay all together with good Wi-Fi. You're getting finally the pocket money that you should receive. And most of them were unhappy, really unhappy. And they told me, yes, but we are in the middle of the city. The only things that we know is how to work in agriculture. Here, there is no job, also because, as you know, Sicily is one of the poorest regions in Italy, so there is not much job, especially in small centers, small cities, small towns, as they were. We prefer to be in the place, even though it was, shitty, it was in the middle of nothing, without services. They were not doing anything to the houses. We were receiving only like food that was cold. We were not able to cook. And in spite of all this, we were better off there because we could work illegally and getting some money, while here we have nothing to do the whole day. So which is also interesting, I guess, because most of the times we see about the exploitation in the countryside, and then you see that maybe most of them, they are not working every day. They go a couple of times per week, which is enough to get some money. They will kind of like look for always constantly for a better place, or they will fight even to get a contract, because then in the end, the contract is what really is somehow dividing them from irregularity. Because once you have a contract, I mean, not if you're an asylum seeker, so that's also the problem. But now I don't want to like complicate so much, because migration law, although it's very young, because it's less than 30 years that we have migration laws, it's quite bureaucratically, complex. So I don't want to like complicate a lot. So I wanted just to show you that while on the one hand, we could say that the entire asylum system is generating irregularity and is generating exploitation and also inhuman treatments. On the other hand, we have individuals that have agency, an agency capable of overcoming most of the problems, and they are being able also through the connections that they have with, for example, movements, and I'm just putting my camera back. So with movements and, for example, other NGO, they were able to create what's been defined, this is a nice concept, as welfare from below. So the possibility of creating a welfare state, namely, you know, a series of services that should be provided by some sort of institutions, but from the ground, from below, building themselves up this sort of services. And I mean, I had another slide on the pandemics and on the COVID-related situation, but maybe we can leave it to the Q&A. So maybe Manu would give me, yeah, 45 minutes, no?
Yeah, perfect. I just wanted to say like 5 more minutes would be good. So perfect timing.
Nice.
Yeah, thanks for your talk. Yeah, I might start with questions. I might just let the others know that after a short question and answer now, there's the possibility to join us in our GC meeting and like to have a virtual beer or something, or virtual coffee, whatever you want to drink, and ask some other questions to Pepper, which you might don't want to address to the whole visitors. I would ask you 2 questions in the beginning, together in one block, and then you can answer to them. The first question is really short. Somebody asked about the dissertation you mentioned at the beginning and said it was something like Cartography of Europe something, and maybe you can just name us the author and the name again. And the second question refers to this first bigger view that you made, and they are asking if you know anything about countries that have a relocation agreement, like Tunisia and Morocco, which you mentioned, which are like safe countries. If there are any cases of that you know that they also take back or take refugees that are not from Tunisia or not from Morocco, like from far more south of Africa, for example.
Okay, so yeah, the first is it's a PhD dissertation. It's called Rodrigo Bueno Lesi, but I also can give you the slides at the end. So maybe Manu, I don't know how he will show it to you. He's a geographer at Radboud University in Nijmegen, where I studied. And he did this PhD project on the cartographic identity of Europe. So the maps that I took are taken only from an article that kind of came out from the dissertation, because the dissertation, I think it's like 800 pages or something. But what is his main point is that Europe as a continent has also been invented in maps, and the cartography was always a way for which national states were kind of generating an identity. And most of the times when you talk about borders, you talk about natural borders, like for Italy would be the Alps or the Mediterranean Sea. But I mean, these are not natural borders. Is that we are so much acquainted with the notion of maps and cartography and of natural borders that we kind of really see it in this way. So the dissertation is more historical, right? So starting from, I don't know which age of cartographic exploration, arriving to, of course, the colonial period with the division of Africa and all these kind of things. I'm not sure it is aligned. I've never read the PhD dissertation. I know him personally. I read most of his articles. You can find them on, I think, even academia. So maybe with Manu, we will be able to give you the name. For what concerns the relocation agreements, deportation agreements, because relocation in Europe, in the European law, means either people coming from, let's say, Africa to Europe, or people that are in Italy or in Greece and they are going, like what happened with Moira and the fire and Germany taking people, which I would like you to know that they've been most rejected, and so they are now irregulars with, I think it's called in Germany, Duldung, which is a deportation decree. So just to know, solidarity, it goes as far as this, you know, then the rest, it's the same. So instead, we need to talk about deportation, and yes, it has happened a lot of times, many times, especially when there are like money agreements. It happens that people are getting deported in the wrong countries. I think one of the funniest, let's say, it's not funny at all, was in Italy when a guy from Niger ended in Nigeria. Okay, so the consulate of Nigeria identified this person as a Nigerian, but he was from Niger, which is another country. Probably Italians didn't know, I'm not so sure. He was actually married to an Italian, so they had no right to deport him, and he was deported nonetheless, and then rescued, okay? So it's funny because in the end, he's now back in Turin, okay? But I mean, if this can happen to people who technically should have a citizenship, imagine to those who are irregulars. And also, most people don't really declare their documents, you know. So especially if you are coming or expiring a visa, you will not tell your nationality. And so sometimes consulate, especially under monetary payment, they will just, yes, I mean, they are from our nation, and then it's up to them. Yeah, so.
Okay, thank you. I would give you 2 more questions for now.
Yeah.
The first was about the everyday life at CARA Mineo and how, like you said something that they get €2.50 per day, but they can also get it in values. And there was the question in if like how much did they receive it in cigarettes? Can you like explain this again?
Yeah,
What you meant by this?
Yeah.
And then the second question is, how is the employment of undocumented people controlled or sanctioned by the state of Italy or by Sicilian?
Okay, so for what concerns the first question, yes. So, technically, the European Union says €2.50 per day, right? How much it is? 75 euros? I'm not so sure. I think at that time it was even more. They were supposed to receive like something like 100 euros per month, but it can be given in different ways. One of these is voucher or goods. So they were receiving all this pack of cigarettes from the same tobacconist. So you see how, you know, things are going. The value they were able, I mean, I think that the value was actually 75 euros, you know, but they cannot sell it for the same price because otherwise people would just go to buy them in the tobacconist. Why, you know, wasting times? So they had to sell them like as illegal cigarettes for like €3 per pack. And they were doing at the end no more, I think they told me 45 euros from selling all the cigarettes, which, you know, were enough to buy another couple of stuff at the market the same day and then maybe sell them. You know, I mean, in a way, they had to become entrepreneur because there was no other way. So the other question was the unemployment or the employment of irregulars. So, of course, you cannot employ irregulars in Italy because that's, I think it's called helping clandestine immigration, which is, you know, crazy. And we have several laws against the exploitation. So those are 2 different things. You cannot exploit people, technically, of course. I mean, that's obvious, right? And you cannot employ irregulars. But what happens most of the times is that you employ irregulars and also exploit them to death. So as you can see, I mean, laws are not really, you know, it's also difficult to enforce in the first place because no one really wants to denounce or make a lawsuit, right? Because for the migrant, doesn't make sense. He will lose the job or she will lose the job. They will lose, you know, and probably they will also be afraid of repercussion. Other people are not really denouncing because it's their job, it's all these kind of things. So, and the fact that all these kind of things are also very hidden, you know, because Sicily is big and it's full of the countryside, and we don't have so many people checking all the agricultural places because, I mean, it's like 80% of people, I guess, work in agriculture or something. You get this phenomenon more and more. Then the problem, the real question is why we are putting people like so close to that kind of jobs, but I don't have an answer for that, besides the institutional racism, I guess. And I don't know if I answered, so maybe you can check with the person.
Yeah, I think for now it's totally fine as an answer. As the next question, and I would almost make it the last question of the official part, goes in a kind of same direction. It's the question of the role of the mafia. You just mentioned once, like the refugees are like the new cocaine for the mafia, so they make a lot of money by illegal employment, for example. Maybe you can just shortly give some examples or say again, how does this system work? How is it possible for the mafia to own refugee camps or to own the refugees, especially in employment?